Good morning, everybody. It's really good to be here. You know, a while ago, I was in the Lake District with my husband Mark and our friends Al and Mel. And we'd been on a really, really long walk and we were quite tired. And to be honest, we began to realise that maybe we'd taken a wrong turning. And we'd walked further than we thought we had, and there's a question over whether we knew where we were or not. And at that point, the mist came down. And two of us were very confident that we could make our way back to the car. Two of us were not so confident. In fact, I think we struggled to keep a lid on our panic. The only thing that actually got us through was a regular question, are you sure you know where we're going? Are you sure you know where we're going? And a lot of prayer. A lot of prayer. I'm not going to say which two were the panickers and which two. I'm not going to say it. The point I'm making is that actually it took the situation to go really quite bad. Some of us think not so bad, I know. Before we thought to pray, okay? And sometimes in our front line, things have to get really bad before we think to pray. And that's really not how God intends us to do life on our front line. This morning then I'm going to look at how our front line shapes our prayers. And like any good teacher, I've got 3 points that I want to get across to you. And here we go. These are those points. And I'm going to go through them one by one in this order. What do we mean by how our front line shapes our prayers? What are the challenges to praying for our front line? And how should we pray for our front line? So the first thing I want to consider, if this works, where am I supposed to be pointing this? There, there, brilliant, okay. What is our front line? Our front line, and I'm sure over the last few weeks we've really got to grips with this, our front line is wherever we are in our normal, everyday life. It's anyone that we connect with. That could be our family, it could be our friends, it could be people in our workplace. It could be people that we come across in the shops, it could be the doctor on the end of a phone. Anybody that we connect with is our front line. And the second thing I want to think about is what do we mean when we say prayer? Because I think when it comes to our front line, we can narrow how we think we pray for our front line. And it is asking for ourselves and for other people, and I think that's the one that we come to most naturally. But it is also thanking God. It is also worshipping God in our front line and confessing when things aren't brilliant on our front line, perhaps when we haven't been quite who we would have in our best selves wanted to be in terms of an ambassador for Him. It is also spiritual warfare. And I do want to talk a little bit about that because I think in our society, we can forget sometimes that we're in a battle. Our culture is such that life is relatively easy. We don't experience the kind of desperate lack and challenge of some cultures that much more easily turn and recognize when they're in a battle. And we don't access God as we should do. We need to get better at it. We need to regularly ask ourselves the question, on my front line, am I in a spiritual battle? And the answer is yes, you are. Okay? In case you're in any doubt, yes, you are. And how do I fight? How do I fight? So I'm going to take a couple of minutes, more than that, to look at really, essentially, where we are and who we're with affects what we pray. Because it does. And if it doesn't, it should. I'm going to look now. Maybe it's hidden behind the thingy. Okay. What are the challenges to praying for our front line? Now, to be honest, there are some areas of your front line that you will find quite easy to pray for. You will find quite naturally that you pray regularly for them. In actual fact, they can be a joy to you to pray for. And they could be things like your family. And you get excited and you're challenged by it, but you're excited by what God's doing in a certain area. And in a way, those are easy prayers. But I want to talk for a minute about when praying for our front line is a challenge to us. I'm aware that for everybody here, your front line will look different. There is not one person whose front line is made up of exactly the same things as somebody else's. And I'm also aware that some people will find that they have front lines, areas of life that are life-giving. They are exciting. They are fun. You connect with people who bring you life. There is joy in them, and that's good. There will be other areas that are comfortable, that are pleasant, that are just easy. And maybe there are some areas that are a little bit dull, boring, where nothing seems to happen. And neither would you expect anything to happen. And then there are maybe other areas that are clearly a battleground for you. Difficult circumstances, whether that's financial, health-wise, relational, whatever it may be, there's a front line that you're facing that is a battle. But I do want to say that although our front lines can present very differently, there is a battle going on in every single front line. And if there isn't, or if you can't see it, it may be worth asking the question of God, what is really going on here? What should I be praying about? Help me to see this front line as you see this front line. However your front line is presenting at the moment, it deserves your prayer. It needs your prayer. And sometimes there are real challenges. We feel that there are real challenges to our prayer. And the challenges could be, oh, look at that, how to work the clicker. That could be the challenge that you're facing right now. Here we go. First of all, that you haven't actually thought about it. You haven't even spotted that prayer is needed on your front line. It's going to be a challenge to pray if you haven't spotted that you need to pray. It could be that you've been praying for a long time and that you are exhausted from praying and nothing seems to be changing. Nothing seems to be happening. And so you've given up. That is a real challenge to praying for your front line. Or maybe the situation is so difficult that you don't even know where to start. Or maybe on your front line you've been hurt. You've been offended by what's gone on. And you can't bring yourself to pray for that particular front line. I'm going to go back again. Boom. Okay. So I want to share with you just for a minute one area that I've really struggled with, a frontline area where I have really struggled to consistently pray. And that is my workplace. In my mind, I work in a school, okay? In my mind, primarily, when I think of praying for my front line, I think what I'm being asked to do is to pray for opportunities to tell people about Jesus, to tell people that Jesus died for their sins and they've got a response to make. Or I think I've got to pray for opportunities to invite them to a carol service or to Alpha or to whatever it may be. And to be honest, I have to be honest here, I find that really stressful. I find it really stressful. And there are a number of reasons why I find it stressful. Occasionally, I have invited people to the carol service and they've accepted More's the Miracle. Incredible. They have accepted. But on the whole, I would say that over time, I've stopped praying for my front line in that way because, to be honest, being there has felt a little bit like Groundhog Day. And I've had a feeling of being a failure, of not representing God very well in my workplace, with my attitudes, with things I've said. That makes it really difficult then for me to feel like I have the right to ask people to come along to a carol service. It seems like such a simple thing, but when your life doesn't match up to what you think it should look like, it becomes a massive stumbling block. And to be honest, for a long time, it's been easier to stay quiet. I've even had thoughts that the only way to affect my workplace for Jesus would be to find another job and start again and try and be a better Christian somewhere else. I don't know if that resonates with you at all. It may not do. But I wonder if you're sitting there thinking, please, don't ask me to pray for that particular front line. It is such a mess. I've made such a mess of it. I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if I want to fix it. I'm disheartened. I'm disillusioned. And if I'm praying for anything, I'm praying for a way out of that job, a way out of that marriage, a way out of that friendship. I just want to go and start again. When our front line is like that, turning to God is probably the last thing that we want to do. We don't want to pray in case we hear something we don't want to hear. But we'll just end up really sad and stuck and unhappy. Although the challenges can be very real, we still need to pray. We can't stop just because we've got tired. We can't stop just because we've been offended. We can't stop just because it's really difficult. We have to pray for breakthrough. And you know, Jesus had something to teach us, didn't he? About how to do all of life, every front line well. It starts with him. I want to read a few verses from Matthew. It says this: "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. The way to do life on our front line, the way to pray effectively into our front line is first and foremost for us to be with Jesus. That's it. If we're not with Jesus, if that's not our primary goal, to be with Jesus, we're never going to represent him well because we won't know who it is we're representing. However messed up and exhausting your front line is, Jesus wants you to turn to him and to allow him to change it by changing you. It may need to start with a confessional prayer. Be honest. You've messed up, you've lost heart, you don't want to pray. But he's always gentle in his response. I love what Paul Helms said on the chat, that he was surprised. He's surprised by God's kindness. Isn't that true? When we actually, in the end, say, God, I've messed up, instead of a big stick, we find he's so kind. He's so kind. And there is a way forward. Where it's felt like there was no way forward, there is suddenly a way forward. There is a breakthrough. A few months ago, my front line changed. My testimony is that through illness, I found myself at home for 8 weeks, not working. I wasn't able to leave the house. I was used to being independent. I was used to being busy. I was used to working hard. I was used to being able to manage my life myself. And that suddenly stopped. And to add to it, Mark, my husband, had just had a hip replacement, so he was equally well stopped. So there we were. Our front line was that we were housebound, immobile, and I felt useless. We learned very quickly a deep gratitude for our church family who helped us through that time. But the reality was, our front line was our back room. And that was it. But you know what? I believe that as people began to pray, and they were praying for healing, and I really, really appreciated that. As they prayed, we began to change. Being at home together, we slowly began to develop a different rhythm of life. We had time to read, to listen, to watch teaching, to spend time with God in a way that we would never have found in our normal everyday life. I prayed desperately for healing and to be taken out of that particular front line because I was scared. It scared me and I didn't like it. But as I look back, what I see is that in God's grace, he stopped me in my tracks. I'm definitely not saying that the illness was from him, but I am saying that he chose not to heal me immediately. And I am so thankful for that. Because my life was so far from where it should have been. Probably looked great, because I've been a Christian 33 years, I can fake it. It wasn't where it should have been. But over time, where there was nowhere for me to go, he has gradually changed me. And I am so thankful. That was a better answer to prayer than healing. It's not what I expected, but it was what I needed. So how should we pray then for our front line? I want to share this quote with you actually. I'm not actually going to give you 7 tips for a fruitful prayer life for your frontline. I'm not going to do that. Okay, I'm sure there are them out there. Google them. I'm sure they're there. But I'm going to say this, and this is a truth, and this is courtesy of a guy called Paul David Tripp. He says this: in his grace, and that is God's grace, he leads you where you didn't plan to go in order to produce in you what you couldn't achieve on your own. In his grace, he leads you where you didn't plan to go in order to produce in you what you couldn't achieve on your own. Our front lines are battlegrounds. Often we don't see God at work, and sometimes we don't want to be there. But he is at work. It's just that he isn't primarily working to transform our circumstances. He's working through hard circumstances to transform us. And I would say that I am really grateful for that. As my front line of my back room affected my prayer, I am so grateful that what he did wasn't what I wanted. So grateful for that. Because actually he used that circumstance to begin to change me in a way I could never have changed myself. So I would say to you, pray for your front line, but expect God to change you as a result. When we're changed, then we'll be more effective on our front line. And I have gone back into work. And do you know what I've found? I've found that I'm now much more slowed down and chilled. I listen to people. I'm not looking for opportunities to invite them to the carol service and to Alpha. I'm not looking for opportunities to give them the full-on gospel and ask them to give their life to Jesus, though if that happened, I would be open to that, obviously. But what I am doing is I'm praying for the success of my school. I'm praying for the success of my colleagues. I'm praying for the success of my pupils. I'm praying for the safety of my pupils, because that isn't always a given. I'm praying for flourishing where I am. Unsurprisingly then, I've had opportunities this week to share with people completely out of the blue something about Jesus. In fact, I was sat next to somebody on Friday and she said, "What are you doing this weekend?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm spending most of Saturday preparing. I'm speaking on Sunday." And I thought, what on earth did I say that for? She said, "Oh, what are you speaking on?" "Oh, I'm speaking on how your front line affects your prayers." And I unpacked it, and she was interested. And then she unpacked her life in front of me and cried, and we cried. I don't know. I don't think that would have happened before I was ill. God transformed me through my circumstances, and that's been helpful. I want to finish with this. And I know that this has felt a little bit random. I said to Emma earlier, I feel like this doesn't quite stick together like I would usually want a talk to stick together. But I'm hoping that as Emma prayed, that there will have been wisps that will have gone out and will have hit each of you slightly differently. And you'll have something to take away from this time. This is what Romans 12 says. And talking about our ordinary everyday lives, our front line. So here is what I want you to do. God helping you take your everyday, ordinary life. You're sleeping, eating, going to work, walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. Be with him. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. We will be most effective in our prayer for our front line, whatever our front line looks like, if we are with him. That's actually quite an easy yoke. We don't have to fix all the problems of the front line. Okay? We don't even have to be perfect because we're disciples of Jesus. We're on a journey, and sometimes we'll slip up. But that doesn't mean he's left us. It doesn't mean that we still haven't got something to do on our front line. As we finish then, I just want to invite people to come forward for prayer, and perhaps the band could come back. I've got quite a few things that I think people might want prayer for, but if you've heard something else and you want prayer for something else, then hey, feel free to come forward for prayer. I want to ask that if you recognise that you've been sleepwalking through your front line, unaware of the needs and reality of the situation, and you want God to show you what is really going on and how to pray, I want to ask that you would come forward for prayer. I want to ask that if you are exhausted by your front line and recognise that you need to do this less in your own strength and more in God's strength, then come forward. And if you can't see a way forward and you are ready to give up on whatever it may be, your workplace, your family, your husband, your wife, your kids, your friends. If you just want to run away from your front line, can I ask you to come forward and run to God instead? You perhaps don't want to turn to him, but I promise you he's got the answer. And as the band plays, I'm going to ask you to come forward. I also want to make available a little symbol. If you were here last Sunday, you will have heard Derek talk about an exercise book. And he talked about the joy of opening a new exercise book and having a fresh page. Can I tell you that I've given loads of my kids this week a new exercise book. I've said, if you want a fresh start, come and get a new exercise book. Might cost the science department a fortune, I don't know. But anyway, I've got some exercise books. They're not from school. I have bought them myself, honestly. And they're recycled, okay? Recycled paper, so that's good. If you just want a fresh start on your front line and you want to start writing down what God does, come and get one of these books. And if they run out, I'll buy some more. They're all here at the front, thank you. They're a lovely sagey green colour. Okay. Thank you.